So if the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all God, right? That's what God is. At the same time, the Father has always existed in a sense, but these other elements of God or the other persons of God came into being, then they weren't a part of what God was until later on. Hey guys, welcome back to Muslim Minds. Today we're going to react to why did the Great Schism happen? So this is something that we've also had recommendations to reacting to, which is the schism between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. So very interested to see what this video has to say.
The Great Schism of 1054, also known as the East-West Schism, marks the official separation of the Western Church, based in Rome, from the Eastern Church of Constantinople. While it is generally declared that the division of the churches came in 1054, many historians actually believe that there was not one specific event of the schism, but many that eventually added up to a breaking point. Conflict within the churches of Christianity can be seen as far back as the 2nd century even. The events of the Quarto-Deciman controversy can be regarded as potentially the start of what would become the Great Schism, when the Bishop of Rome attempted to excommunicate a group of churches throughout Asia Minor in 190. Pope Victor I, hoping to settle the debate between whether Pascha or Easter should be celebrated on the 14th of Nisan or on the following Sunday, tried to do so by overextending his papal authority to excommunicate the Quarto-Decimans, which were those Christians who refused to observe the Lord's Supper on a Sunday. While most agreed with the celebrating of Pascha on Sunday, many bishops strongly reprimanded the Pope for his actions and were in complete disapproval of his effort to claim supremacy over all Christianity. The Quarto-Decimans utterly ignored their excommunication. But when the First Council of Nicea rolled around in 325, every Christian church became required to celebrate Easter on the same day, a Sunday. Another topic covered at this council was the Nicean Creed, which is a statement of faith used by a...
So I guess the first question I would have is, why was there a difference among the dates? Why wasn't it already established which date?
So it was the day of Easter, right? To celebrate the day Jesus rose from when he was resurrected, as Christians believe. That's what they said in the video, right? The day of Easter. What are you doing?
I don't remember, because I know Easter's like either the death or resurrection.
Because the Western Church felt the need to change the creed and add the Filioque clause. Without bothering to consult the Eastern Church leaders, the West tweaked the words of the Nicean Creed, which was an important part of divine liturgy, and still is. The original version
So yeah, it's here saying the Filioque, I guess. They added "and from the Son," and this is something that Eastern Orthodox Christians have argued is in violation. So the Catholics added in the Son into the Nicean Creed, and that's something the Orthodox, they thought was wrong.
I think it may be the wording specifically and from the Son, because I know that there's a difference of opinion regarding the how the Son was pre-eternally begotten from the Father, or something to that effect.
So just from this, it seems like the Catholics were trying to add "and from the Son" into it, but the Orthodox people, they didn't want to. So wouldn't that mean like the Catholics were trying to add something that wasn't there, wasn't originally agreed upon?
I guess we'll have to see more what the reasoning is behind that.
Yeah, I have seen the Filioque people have left in our comments before, but yeah, definitely need to learn more about it.
in liturgy, and still is. The original version included a portion saying, "I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father, who with the Father and the Son is adored and glorified, who has spoken through the prophets."
Or maybe it's about how the Holy Spirit came about, from the Father or the Son. I think that's maybe where the disagreement comes from.
The Church in Rome, however, decided to add the phrase, "and the Son," after "who proceeds from the Father."
Ah, okay, so the difference is proceeding from the Father and the Son versus just the Son. Or just the Father?
Just the Father.
Yeah, either just the Father or the Father and the Son together. The Spirit comes.
The Catholics added on and the Son, but the Orthodox, they thought that was wrong because in the Nicean Creed it was originally just the Father. Then in the 6th century they're trying to add and the Son.
To the East, not only was this done without their approval, but it was complete.
So God has always been consisted of these three persons that are all one being. Then the fact that the other persons came into being, like God is already God, right? And He is the Trinity according to Christian doctrine. But then these other aspects of God came into being later on. That doesn't make much sense, because you're saying God has developed things about Himself with these other persons, but He's always been existing.
Yeah, I think some of the things that Comet said is God the Father was always eternal, and then
the Son was pre-eternally begotten from the Father, and then you have the difference of opinion here.
And the Holy Spirit came from both of them, and it's something that inspires people and does the work of God in the hearts of people. But
yeah, so
they always said the Father is eternal, but then...
So if the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all God, right? That's what God is. But at the same time, the Father has always existed in a sense, but these other elements of God or the other persons of God came into being. Then they weren't a part of what God was until later on. Like, to me, it doesn't make sense. If they're God, but God wasn't that at a time, that means these things developed, or God developed this.
It doesn't make sense because also in the Trinity it says all these parts, they are all powerful within themselves and all independent. But then how can they all have came after the Father but be independent and like
exactly
just as
they
powerful?
would be dependent on the Father then.
Yeah. If anyone, leave in the comments below what you guys think on that.
Heresy. Both today's Catholics and Orthodox Christians agree with this statement. But the addition of "and the Son" to the Nicean Creed seems to utterly contradict this shared belief. The issue appears to be theological, but could potentially be more of a translation problem. The East, who use Greek translations, had every right to see the West's change as heresy, because in Greek it would be. The English translation saying "who proceeds from the Father" compares to the original Greek version and essentially refers to the one true source of the Holy Spirit, and can really only be interpreted along the lines of saying "originates from." The Latin translation used by the West, however, uses the wording "qui a patre procedit." This is where the discord seems to stem from. The East sensibly was infuriated by the addition of the Filioque, because to imply that both the Father and Son were the source of the Holy Spirit was grossly irresponsible and incorrect. But due to the translation differences and apparent disconnect of understanding between the East and West at the time that the Nicean Creed was changed, many from the Western Catholic side aim to settle this argument with the explanation that, using the intention of the Latin translation, the West only meant to add on to the statement by clarifying that the Holy Spirit can only exist alongside the Father and Son, not that both are the creator or source of the Holy Spirit, which would indicate that the Spirit is of lesser status than the Father and Son. Still, even though the addition of the Filioque...
Well, it's either one or the other. Even if one is uncomfortable, if the belief was that, originating from the Father, but just because that doesn't sound acceptable or kind of like comfortable, then they're adding, with the Son as well. What's their basis for adding that? Because why do you have one standard but then adopt this? I hope they go more into the reasonings behind that. But either way, talking about lesser or origins and whatnot, it seems like the Father was the one, and then at some point God the Son and God the Spirit came in succession afterwards.
Yeah.
That seems to be what the progression is that they, or at least because when you talk about origin, it means stemming from something, right? In this case, that's something being the Father. And if they originated from the Father, then that kind of gives a highlight or an importance or a status to the Father, which would kind of dismantle this notion of being separate but equal. And the Father always seems to be the one that's emphasized to reach, and he's the origin, right? And then the Spirit and the Son come after him. Even this whole notion of Father and Son, like the Father has a specific status that the Son does not. The Son is subservient to the Father in a lot, like, in human.
Yeah, just like father, son comes from a father.
Like in humanity, sons are subservient to their father, and in the divine court of law, using the same words that Jesus is the Son of God or Son of the Father, that would also denote a ranking or a difference of ranking among the different persons of the Godhead or the Trinity. So.
Could arguably be valid in terms of its meaning, there was another reason that the East was wildly disapproving. To grasp why, you first have to understand the chain of events that occurred during the creation of the Nicean Creed. The first event of extreme relevance is the Council of Nicaea, of course. This was the council in 325, at which the original Nicean Creed was written, with both the East and West in attendance, although no mention of the Holy Spirit's procession was made. Next in 381 was the Council of Constantinople, including only the East. At the Council of Constantinople, the Eastern Church made some adjustments to the original Nicean Creed, and that is technically where they added the portion of the creed which addresses the procession of the Holy Spirit. The creed remained.
So it was the East that addressed the...
East added the Holy Spirit like 56 years after the Council of Nicaea. So originally the Holy Spirit wasn't included at all, and then in 500 something they added the Son as well. So originally it was only the Father, I guess. That's what I'm getting from.
That was added by the East. So the Orthodox.
That's added by the East like 56 years after the Council of Nicaea. So then that would mean the original Council of Nicaea just had the Father? Maybe? I don't know. We'll just continue with this video and see.
Yeah, I don't know, bro.
Remained known as the Nicean Creed, in reference to the original, but it is important to note that it is actually not the original contents of the creed that is used today, and that was changed in Latin translation. That fact becomes immensely applicable at the East-West Council of Ephesus in 431, where Canon VII was established to say, "The Holy Council decrees that no one should be permitted to offer a different creed of faith, or in any case, to write or compose another than the one defined by the Holy Fathers who convened in the city of Nicaea," which in itself may not seem completely damning for the West, until you add the fact that the council president Saint Cyril of Alexandria also declared, "We prohibit any change whatsoever in the creed of faith drawn up by the Holy Nicean Fathers. We do not allow ourselves or anyone else to change or omit one word or syllable in that creed." Nevertheless, while Saint Cyril's statement complicates matters, there remains one obscurity given the fact that the original creed was changed at the Council of Constantinople. This begs the question of whether the East had already violated the new canon, or did they intend to reference the Constantinople update of the creed as the creed of faith drawn up by the Holy Nicean Fathers? The answer to that could be what makes or breaks the West's validity in their own adjustments of the creed. But either way, this discord remained a building tension. In addition to the unresolved issue, the East and West also could not seem to find middle ground on two other matters: the use of unleavened bread for the sacrament of communion, or whether clerics should remain celibate or not. On the subject of the bread dispute, the Western Church believed that unleavened bread should be used because of the fact that it is historically more likely that Jesus would have used unleavened bread at the Last Supper. On the point of celibacy, the West was determined to maintain that all priests and bishops must be celibate and unwed. While
the only reason I can see how this makes sense, being celibate and unwed, is so that you don't have worldly distractions and you're able to devote yourself fully to God. But the issue, already some issues I can see that come from this, is barring the natural human desire for intimacy. So that may come out in other fashions, or might kind of like fester desire in someone, and it may come out in an inappropriate fashion. And the other thing is that if you are righteous or have a righteous family, or you're a family of God, you would want that to be your progeny. You would want that to be your people. You would want that to be what is brought forth in the upcoming generations, those who are God conscious and who are subservient to the teachings of your faith. Like Islamically, there are scholars and even the prophets and messengers themselves. They had families, they had kids, and it was actually kind of like a highlight to their skill and their status, that they're able to balance and their life and worship of God and their duties to God and the faith while maintaining a family, which as well as is also a very virtuous and noble deed, to raise a family, raise kids that are believing in God. And I think these are things that are very important. So I don't truly understand this aspect of it. I think that having a family will actually increase one's consciousness, gratitude to God, and their kind of their spirituality if they know what they're doing.
Yeah. In Islam, we believe it's better to have a balanced life. If you try to restrict yourself and just have a fully religious life, you're not going to really understand anything. You have to know how to be a spouse, a father,
It'll be hard to help and relate others.
Yeah. You can't really be someone in a leadership role if you haven't experienced what they experienced. So if you're just excluding yourself to study religion, you'll never actually be able to help people.
You'll be unavailable to those because you're not going to be able to connect with those individuals.
Exactly. So that's something in Islam. Our like clergy, imams, we are encouraged to get married, have kids, stuff like that. It's not a restriction, and we don't believe in like the restriction of your human desires, up to some extent, of course. Like for sexual stuff, it's not something that's restricted, and we have seen, with some Catholic leadership, it comes out in bad ways. It's not like something well known,
and it's not something that's embedded in the faith. The reason you see it happen among priests and figures like this is because of this restriction of that desire. It's a natural human desire, and the not having a healthy outlet to explore that desire is where you get these abnormal kind of desires build up in your head. It's even like there are sayings of people who are out in the Navy when they are like on their adventures and whatnot, that they find people who they are on their adventures with more attractive than normal because they have limited their population and their exposure to just this many people, and they still have the desire in them, so they end up expelling it on the crewmates. So that's why you have all these jokes about people in the Navy and like, oh, there's a lot of homosexuality in the Navy and like lots of like sexual, like there's so many jokes with the Navy regarding this. And that's because it's normal for humans to want to engage in this practice. But if you limit yourself, it's going to come out in some way, whether beneficial or not.
While the East accepts married men to be ordained as priests, though they cannot remarry if their wife dies, and only bishops are required to stay celibate. Despite the lack of a direct condemnation from the West of married priests at the time of the Great Schism, the idea of complete celibacy was already being pushed on the one side. Potentially, these religious disputes could have been peacefully resolved if more effort had been made. But there were also political disagreements as well. Maybe most notably, the decision of whether the Pope should be of higher authority than any patriarch or other leader or not. The East naturally strongly disapproved of this statement, and tensions begin to rise between the Pope and Patriarch of Constantinople. Though the East and West as a whole were responsible for the strain, the immediate events of the schism in 1054 might be soundly pinned on the contemporary Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Cerularius. Determined to maintain the Eastern Church's independence from being overrun by the West, Cerularius seemed almost intent on creating a schism. Initially, when the Byzantine Emperor Constantine IX Monomachus wished to align with the Pope and the Roman Empire against the threat of the Normans, Cerularius refused to cooperate whatsoever. In 1052, the Patriarch went as far as to demand that all Latin churches within his diocese use the Greek language and practices. 2 years later, Pope Leo IX, utterly resolute on negotiating an alliance with the Byzantines, sent 3 legates to Constantinople. Unwavered from his obstinance, Cerularius flat out refused to meet with the legates. As the situation continued to drag on with no clear end, the Pope died back in Rome and left one of his legates, Cardinal Humbert of Silva Candida, with a new idea. Saturday, July 16th, 1054, Cardinal Humbert marched into the Hagia Sophia Cathedral during Divine Liturgy and placed a charter of excommunication right on the main altar, officially excommunicating Patriarch Michael Cerularius and his church. In retaliation, Cerularius excommunicated the papal legates, and, according to some historians, the Western Church along with them. Although this mutual excommunication was not the sole source of the Great Schism of 1054, it stands as the final straw for both sides, and the marker of division of Christianity into today's Catholic and Orthodox denominations. Multiple attempts have been made to heal the schism, but the East particularly has remained set in their autonomy. The relationship between the denominations has seen some improvement and better civility since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, and the establishment of the Joint International Commission for Theological Dialogue between the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church in 1979, but the East and West churches still prevail as individual and autonomous branches of Christianity.
So, I guess to summarize, looks like that the primary differences between the Catholic and the Orthodox are traditional differences, and then you have that creedal differences about the, I guess you could say, the origin of the Spirit, Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and adding in the Son later in like 580 or whatever they said. But yeah, it just seems like they're very similar. It just has to do with the schism in 1054 when the Pope wanted to have more control over all the churches, but the Patriarch noped him basically, and it's like, I'm not gonna follow you. Then
and also difference of like how you view the papal office.
Then the West tried to excommunicate the East, and the East just excommunicated them.
We excommunicate
just
you.
Excommunicating everyone. So then they just both from there had the schism.
Yeah.
Of the West and East. So I guess
I would say the closeness overall from their theology seems to be like pretty tight, like kind of like Nicea, where there's not severe differences, but there's like,
it's more political.
Yeah, more political. Yeah, exactly. Or like, well, it's still theological, but not in the sense of like so much of the core theology. Even in like elements of the creed, like they still have the Trinity, they still have the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, salvation, all these kind of things. It's just the difference of like the papal office and like the addition of those kind of elements into the creed. But overall, seems to be extremely similar.
It was interesting though, because it seemed the West was trying to update the religion and creed, and then like it said in this video, people like Cyrus of Alexandria, they were saying, we will not change this, not even a syllable. So they seemed like the East was more rigid on sticking with what they believe the righteous like predecessors put, but the Catholic, the West, was more willing to change some stuff and add on for whatever reason. If anyone knows why they were trying to add on the Son and stuff to it, because it seems like the East, they denied that, and that was something that started the Great Schism back in the day. So it's interesting, but it's not too much different, I guess. If you guys enjoyed this video, please leave some comments and feedback you have for us. Remember to like and subscribe so we can grow our channel and put out more videos for you guys to watch and grow our understanding of different religions, and also put out Islamic viewpoints for you guys. And Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.